Hi there, Kawhi here. In today's video we're taking a look at Mage for Dragonflight PrePatch. Alright, let's look at the Mage general tree. From the general tree, there are two major changes coming with the PrePatch. First of all, Greater Invis. This is now available to all Mage specs. For certain specs such as Frost Mage, which is insanely squishy outside of its ice block. And for Fire Mages it's even better. Some interesting interactions, for instance, is on the 9. Now you can completely solo soak 3 entire meteors. So since invisibility interacts with this mechanic, making you skip it, you can first use your general invis, then your greater invis, and then for the third one you can just ice block. For a frost mage they can solo 4 meteors. So for a raiding perspective, greater invisibility is going to be a massive upgrade in terms of mage in general. So for the second one, it is Temporal Warp, and Temporal Warp, it is the Lost Legendary coming back all the way from Legion. It was unfortunately not used really that much in Shadowlands. However, as an addition to the Mage class, it is absolutely insane. It is. If you look at certain fights, you can look at certain fights and really see a massive a massive difference. So for instance, if you look at a fight like Soulrender Dormicane in Sanctum, he spawns these ads at a very not really a set interval, but a very periodic interval. There's one each minute or two. Basically, you have Lost up for the first one and you have Lost for the second one. This makes Mage insanely capable at dealing with these kind of situations where there's like periodic ads coming in, when there's certain burst phases. Like if you look at a fight like Sludge Fist, for instance, like Temporal Warp is absolutely insane. So getting Temporal Warp is going to be an absolute massive difference for mages in general, how you play your class. But sadly though, the general tree itself, it still needs a lot of redesign, it needs a bunch of tuning, it needs also a bunch of fixes to be deemed a great spec. When comparing it to like a Prot Warrior tree, it's really obvious what the differences are, not only in terms of padding, but also in terms of meaningful choices, stuff like that. It's just a completely different world, unfortunately. So for the Fire Mage, with PrePatch, Fire Mage is gonna feel quite good to play. We're gonna get SKB, Kindling, Pyroclasm, just that as a whole, those 3 talents, that's gonna be a amazing base for Fire Mage to operate with. And then second of all, the biggest change of them all is that Flame Strike. We just never use Flame Strike. Unfortunately though, we're still going to be playing with the Fated Affixes, and which with the Fated Affixes means we are going to be playing with the modes. And yeah, with the modes it means, well, if there's 40 targets, well, unfortunately Flame Striking is the best, unfortunately. If the modes were on like a 20-second spawn where they would last for 20 seconds, maybe, not speccing into it is worth, but since it's a small duration, the modes, they die really fast, so spreading big ignites, it really doesn't synergize as well with this modes. However, outside of Shadowlands Faded Affixes, you never want to spec into Flame Strike, and that's going to be massive. Before, you really had to stack everything into the Flame Patch, and it was just in general for Mythic Plus insanely tilting if a mob was maybe moving out of your Flame Patches, or just in general you had a tank that was just randomly moving the mobs. It was just insanely tilting to play with Flame Strike. So getting away from Flame Strike is going to be an insanely new playstyle. Not new, but it is just a fresh playstyle, right? It's from BFA, sure, but we have been flame striking now for the last 2 years, so it is definitely a big step in the right direction. Also, let's talk about Firestarter and the Scourge guaranteed hot streak. Well, this is going to be insanely massive for Fire Mages in general, especially in those Mythic Plus scenarios where you're just constantly chaining or there's constantly mobs dying. Especially also in a raiding environment when there's ads spawning frequently, you can definitely get a lot of free hot streaks from these 2 talents, and that is going to make your SKB playstyle even more fluid. And with your SKB rotation being more fluid, you're going to get more uptime on combustion itself. So just in general, that Firestarter and Scorch build currently is really fluid. Second of all, not second of all, last of all, Firemind and Blaster Master, these are going to be your new buffs that you want to maintain during and outside of your combustion window. We're still going to be playing with Infernal Cascade, I think, but just in general, it's going to be a really bit weird maintaining all these different buffs. Fortunately, they're either on a 5-second or a 10-second cooldown, so it's not that hard to maintain. Alright, with Frostmage Dragonflight PrePatch, it's going to be quite different from the Necrolord ramp build. You're still going to be playing Necrolord ramp build. It's just a little bit different in how you're going to execute the damage output that is gained once you're fully ramped. So the thing that's really different is that Flurry. This is just no longer a cast, it's an instant, it's a 2-stack max, and that really changes up the pacing of your rotation. Especially Snowstorm, this also, it creates a little bit of an alternative button to use during your cooldowns, basically stacking up your Cone of Cold damage. It can create some interesting burst windows. Snap Freeze, this is also an insane talent for Frost Mages. They get a Brain Freeze and a Fingers of Frost, which it creates some burst windows. In general, Frost Mage is going to be insanely... it's still basically locked to spamming the same 3 buttons. However, in terms of its defensive capability, you're going to get greater Invis. And just in general, Temporal Warp is also an insanely spell for Frost Mages, as it is for Fire Mages. Alright, let's talk a bit about Arcane Mage then. Arcane Mage is the one that is getting the big new mage spell. It's called Arcane Surge. It's a massive talent that basically almost replaces Arcane Power. You're no longer really going to be playing Arcane Power. As you spec into Arcane Power, it will spawn a Rune of Power and deal some increased damage. It is not really Arcane Power, it is more when you're using Arcane Surge. It's like you're pressing Arcane Power now. It's really different, especially when you're looking at the burst rotation. Touch of the Magi is off the global cooldown, it lasts 10 seconds, as well as Arcane Harmony stacking to 20 times and now increasing the damage of Barrage by 5%, so it's a little bit different in that sense, as well as also from Siphon Storm and Mana Gem. These two, they give spell power when being used, so your entire burst rotation is going to be quite interesting. As well as, let's talk about Arcane Orb. This can now be talented into having 2 charges, right? So 2 charges of Arcane Orb. This is going to increase your your movability when doing your burst rotation. It's going to be insane. If you have to move, you can during your burst, so you don't have to hard cast an Arcane Blast, for instance. You can now just use an Arcane Orb while you're moving, just to get another stack of your Radiant Spark going and maybe more arcane charges, as well as Foresight. Foresight is actually massive. Unfortunately, it is not going to be used at all. However, just the ability to have this, like an ability to move at intervals while casting for Arcane Mages, that's absolutely beyond broken. Sadly though, I'll have to end this video there, as normally we would be able to sim a lot of stuff. We would be able to sim all our talents. We would be able to sim all of our, all of our gear. We would be able to sim everything. Currently there's no sims, right? So I can't really talk you guys through that much of a rotation. So yeah, I hope you guys are interested in playing Mage. Mage in general, it's looking really good in terms of raiding, in terms of Mythic Plus, in terms of PvPing. There is sadly some overtuned melee DPS currently on the beta, like Windwalker, there's some Ferals, there is some Rogues, some Red. Enhancement Shaman is insane. Basically every melee is overtuned. This is probably not gonna last. However, even with this tuning, if it were to be live Dragonflight tomorrow, you would still bring a Mage to the hardest content. Mage is probably among the higher echelon currently of ranged. The only range that I would really see competing with Mage in general, whether that's Arcane, Frost or Fire, that's going to be Warlock. Warlocks in general are extremely tanky, and just from last season, seeing how dominant Warlocks were with their tier sets, there's a very likely chance that assuming there's the right tuning from their tier sets, their talents, and also their scaling, that Warlock can do some damage. It's not the best DPS at the moment, but it's also the most bugged range DPS at the moment. There's a ton of bugs with Warlock currently that maybe if some are changed, they might do some actual DPS, you know. The second ranged, you can't even call it a caster as it doesn't cast anything. But yeah, the second rifle for mages for Mythic Plus, for the one range spot, it would be BM Hunter. But when you compare BM Warlock and mages, the one thing that is generally different from all of them is that mages actually provide you a buff that you cannot play with. Say if you are running a comp with like a Windwalker, you're running a Rogue, you're running a Prot Paladin, and you're running a Holy Priest, well, then you need a Lust, right? And then if those three are your options, well, of course BM brings a Lust if they bring a Ferocity pet. Warlocks don't bring a Lust. Mages bring a Lust, however, and it's not just the Lust itself. The mages actually bring a Lust not only for the party, actually also for themselves, right? So they have Temporal Warp now. They can do some massive burst damage whenever that's required. But they also bring Arcane Intellect. They bring a ton of slows, a lot of stuns. Dragon's Breath is insane for pugging Mythic Plus content. It has always been. So yeah, mages in general, they're still looking very, very strong. Thank you guys for watching so much, and have a good evening.